The moment a hidden truth comes into the open, everything changes, and if you stay with this until the very end, you will understand why what Miles Wei revealed was not just a shocking move. It was a calculated decision that completely altered how everyone sees Shen Yue, because what appeared on screen was never meant to be seen, and the reason it surfaced now is something no one is prepared for. It started with a clip.
Short.
Unstable. Barely clear enough to confirm what it showed, but clear enough to trigger a reaction. At first, people were unsure. Not because the footage looked fake, but because it felt impossible. The angle was wrong. The timing was unexpected. The setting did not match anything publicly known. And that is what made it powerful. Because uncertainty creates attention faster than certainty ever could. The image of Shen Yue inside a private space began circulating quietly, then faster, then everywhere. Not because it was verified, but because it raised a question that could not be ignored. Why was she there? And more importantly, why was it being shown now? Miles Wei did not speak immediately. He did not deny it. He did not explain it. And that silence became part of the story. Because when something like this appears without context, the absence of explanation becomes louder than the footage itself. Shen Yue saw at the same time everyone else did. Not earlier, not privately, but in the exact moment it began spreading. And the look on her face was not shock. It was recognition, not of the exposure, but of the situation. Because she knew exactly what that place was. And what it was not. The narrative forming around the clip was immediate. Assumptions built on fragments. Interpretations layered on incomplete information. People connecting dots that had never been meant to connect. But the truth was more complicated. And far less obvious. Miles Wei finally moved. Not publicly. Not through statements. But through something more controlled. He released a second fragment. Not clearer. Not longer. But different. This time showing a timestamp. A small detail. But a critical one. Because it shifted the entire timeline. The moment people noticed the inconsistency between the first assumption and the second detail, everything began to unravel. Because the timeline did not match the story being told. Which meant one thing. The footage was real, but the interpretation was wrong. That realization spread quickly. Faster than the original clip. Because people are drawn to correction just as much as they are drawn to scandal. Now, the question changed. It was no longer why Shen Yue was there. It became why the footage had been structured the way it was. Why release it in fragments? Why allow misunderstanding to grow before correcting it? That is when the focus shifted to Miles Wei. Because this was not accidental. This was controlled. Every piece released with timing that created maximum impact. But not maximum clarity. And that difference matters. Because impact without clarity creates tension. And tension forces attention. Shen Yue finally reached out. Not through public channels. But directly. Because there are conversations that cannot happen in front of an audience. When they faced each other, there was no anger. No immediate accusation. Just a question.
Why?
Miles did not answer immediately. Because the answer was not simple. It was layered. Just like the footage. He looked at her.
Come.
Measured. Then finally spoke. Because the truth would not have been believed otherwise. That line changed everything. Because it reframed the entire situation. This was not exposure. It was demonstration. The footage had not been released to reveal her. It had been released to reveal something else. Something hidden within the way people interpret what they see. The way assumptions form instantly. The way narratives build without full context. And the way quickly perception can be manipulated. Shen Yue understood it before anyone else did. Because she was inside it. She had experienced the shift in real time. From truth, to assumption, to distortion, to correction. And now she saw the full structure. The footage was never the story. The reaction was. Outside, the conversation continued evolving. People who had reacted strongly at first began reconsidering, rewatching, reanalyzing, realizing how quickly they had formed conclusions. And that realization created something more powerful than the original reaction. Awareness. Miles Wei had not just released footage. He had exposed a pattern that exists in every viral moment, every trending clip, every piece of content that spreads faster than understanding. And now that pattern was visible, the fallout did not look like chaos. It looked like reflection, a slower, more careful conversation replacing the initial reaction. Shen Yue stepped forward finally, not to defend herself, but to clarify one thing. What you see is not always what it is. That statement settled everything in a way no explanation could, because it addressed the core of the situation without needing to explain every detail. Miles Wei did not take credit. He did not present himself as the one in control, because this was never about control. It was about revealing how easily it can be lost. In the end, the footage remained, but it no longer carried the same meaning, because meaning had changed. The focus shifted from what was shown to how it was understood. And that is what made this moment unforgettable. Not the clip itself, but the realization that followed it. So now the question is not what happened in that apartment. That part no longer matters. The real question is, how many times have we believed something instantly without ever asking what we were not seeing? Stay with this, because what feels like a single moment may actually be a reflection of something much bigger, and once you understand it, you start seeing it everywhere. The moment the footage stopped being just a clip and started becoming a conversation, everything shifted, and if you stay with this until the very end, you will understand why what Miles Wei said in motion did not end with exposure. It forced a deeper truth to surface in a way no one could reverse, and what Shen Yue chose to do next is what truly changed how the story ends. At first, the reactions kept building. Clips were replayed. Frames were analyzed. People slowed the footage down, zoomed in, compared angles, trying to extract meaning from something that had already lost its original context. But something unexpected began happening. The intensity of the reactions started to slow. Not disappear, but soften. Because the more people looked at it, the more they realized something important. The footage itself was incomplete. Not edited in the way people first assumed, but framed, presented in a way that guided interpretation without providing full understanding. And once that realization spread, the focus shifted again. Now the question was not what the footage showed. It was what it did not show. Miles Wei had been watching this unfold carefully, not interfering, not correcting, because the process itself was part of the reveal. People needed to see how quickly they could form conclusions, and how slowly they would question them. That difference was the entire point. Shen Yue stepped forward at exactly the right moment. Not too early, not too late, because timing determines whether truth is accepted or ignored. When she finally addressed the situation, she did not defend herself. She did not deny anything. Instead, she did something far more effective. She added context. Not all of it. Just enough. Enough to realign the narrative. Enough to show that the situation inside that space was not what people had imagined. Enough to prove that the footage alone could never tell the full story. That moment changed everything. Because once context enters a narrative, speculation begins to collapse. Not instantly, but steadily. The conversation outside shifted again. From reaction to reflection, people began acknowledging how quickly they had accepted a version of events based on a single perspective, how easily the absence of information had been filled with assumption, and how difficult it is to reverse that once it begins. Miles Wei finally spoke, briefly, calmly. He did not explain every detail. He did not justify every action. He simply confirmed one thing. The footage was never meant to expose Shen Yue. It was meant to expose the process. The process of how perception is shaped, how quickly a narrative forms, how easily it spreads, and how rarely it is questioned. That statement did not create noise. It created silence. Because silence in that moment meant understanding. The kind that does not need to be argued. The kind that settles on its own. Shen Yue looked at him differently then. Not with anger, not with relief, but with recognition, because she understood something others were just beginning to see. This was never about a single moment captured on camera. It was about how that moment would be interpreted without context. And now that interpretation had been challenged. The story no longer belonged to the footage. It belonged to the awareness it created. Outside, the conversation stabilized. Not everyone agreed. Not everyone changed their perspective. But enough people did. Enough to shift the overall direction. Enough to weaken the impact the footage originally had. And that is what made the difference. Because impact is what shapes perception. And once impact is reduced, perception becomes flexible again. In the end, there was no dramatic conclusion. No final reveal that answered every question. Because the purpose had already been achieved. The pattern had been exposed. The reaction had been observed. The truth had been reintroduced. And that is where the real ending begins. Because what happened here does not stay contained in one story. It extends into every moment where something is seen without being fully understood. Every time a clip spreads faster than its context. Every time a narrative forms before the full picture is known. That is the real impact of what Miles Wei revealed. Not the footage, but the system behind it. And Shen Yue. She did not walk away from this as someone who was exposed. She walked away as someone who understood the structure better than most. And once you understand the structure, you are no longer controlled by it. So now the question is not what happened in that moment. That question has already lost its importance. The real question is how many times have we believed something instantly without ever asking what we were missing? And once you start asking that, you realize the story was never just about them. It was about all of us.